Hello, and from my home living room, or my kitchen, excuse me, in the house, and I am in my uniform courtesy of New Mexico Military Institute. I've been asked and requested to wear this when I do these, and it's not an issue. It's who I work for, proudly. And today I want to kind of follow up what we looked at yesterday, or what I posted yesterday. And I want to start with a poem, though, believe it or not, a little short one. Not a limerick, even though I'm Irish, but a poem about a place called Anzio, and we're going to look at the Italian campaign a little bit. Praise be to God for this captured sod that rich with blood does seep. Uh, with yours and mine like butchered swine, where hell is 6 feet deep. There's no debate that death awaits, no triumph will we reap. The crosses grow on Anzio, where hell is 6 feet deep. And this is not an original. This was written by a soldier who endured the horrors of Anzio. And what we're about to get into is the idea of, if you remember last time, on the Mediterranean, there's a tug of war between the American military command and the British command about where to land. And Winston Churchill and his staff won out, and the decision was to land in North Africa. Remember Operation Torch, Africa Hot. And so in that brutal campaign in North Africa, this first time the British and the Americans land together, they learn a lot of lessons. That learning curve is now imparted to the American veteran that's fighting. And now they're going to move on and attack this soft underbelly of Europe. And they're going to proceed from Tunisia in the northern part of Africa and jump across to the invasion of this island called Sicily. And this is where you see Patton at his best, perhaps, at his in my opinion, his best. Patton is going to confound the enemy. And what happens is with the American landings at Sicily, we have another learning curve, and this is about these amphibious assaults. And what you begin to see is the integration and technology of warfare. The idea of air power coming in and bombing strategically to take out the enemy, the naval guns and bombardments, and then the amphibious landings, the LSTs, the land sea tanks that come in. And this is a huge learning curve in the Pacific as well as the Atlantic that we're talking about, and in the Mediterranean, nonetheless. But anyway, once Sicily is obtained and controlled via Patton and Bernard Montgomery of the British Eighth Army, now the plan is to get into Italy. At the same time, the Americans are still anxious about this cross-channel invasion, which we'll look at because this actually is important leading up to this. So the decision is to attack Italy, and the idea is to take pressure off the Russians. Remember the big three. The big three would be Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the American president, and then Joseph Stalin, the head of the Soviet Union. And what these guys are doing, what Stalin wants is second front. There's an old joke. Stalin's secretary that he sends to England, to London, to discuss all of this is a man named Molotov, Molotov. And the running joke in England was Molotov knows 4 words of English: yes, no, and second front. That's a good joke. This is what the Russians want because they're getting beat up over there with the Germans, but this is about to change too with Stalingrad. And in fact, that's probably when you study this part in 1943, what we're looking at, the landing at Salerno in the southern part of Italy. It's more important to look at really Stalingrad. It's really the Russians who are going to have this breakout moment. We talk about breakthrough, okay, in Italy, and a breakout in Stalingrad. And those Russians are important. One of the greatest lines I've ever heard and read, I didn't hear it, obviously, I'm not that old yet, was Dwight David Eisenhower, who said, I believe the goal of the war is to keep 8 million Russians in. And the reason, if you remember this, in World War I, the Russians signed that Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. They dropped out of the war. So there's always this deep concern of this grand alliance, the British, the Americans, and the Soviets. Very weird concoction there working together simultaneously. So anyway, this is kind of the setup, and the idea then of the Italian campaign is to provide this second front, which isn't really going to do it. It doesn't really divert too many of the Germans. It's more, once again, you got to go back to the Stalingrad and the vaunted Sixth German Army that's defeated. This is devastating to the Germans. The amount that are killed, the amount that are captured. I mean, this is horrifying to them. This is really the rollback there prior to Walmart. This is the rollback. Ironically, I'm using the communist Soviet Union and the word rollback with Walmart and capitalism, but it works, I think. And so anyway, Salerno is deemed necessary, and so the man who's put in charge of it is the Lieutenant General Mark Clark. That's a fun name, Mark Clark. Now he's kind of a conceited guy, so the letter C is what I really look at with this. Is the idea that Mark Clark is now put in charge. He's this conceited guy, and the reason I have to bring that up is he waves off the bombardment by the air power of the beaches, and he's going to go in. And what he does ends up doing is getting into Salerno. This is Operation Avalanche, and as he gets into Salerno, they get pinned down, and now they're in trouble. And he's starting to think and worry. So, oh my gosh, maybe we need to get off the beach, and what happens here is the Navy comes in, and the other C to me would be cannons. The Navy just opens up. They get real close, right up to the sandbar region. I mean, very dangerous to the Navy, and they save this group of soldiers that have landed on Salerno. Okay, and the objective is really to move up the boot of Italy. This is interesting. You go up. If you go back to Napoleon, Napoleon got it right. You roll it down like a sock. You go down. We're going up. But heck, we're Americans, right? We can do anything. We put our minds to, even defying, this idea. But anyway, Salerno is the right place. And so the landing is there in Salerno. And this is in 1943. I'm sorry, but I mentioned the date appropriately. And as this is going on, um, finally the Americans break out of Salerno, and then they end up moving northward, and they're met with German resistance, Italian but German resistance, and who ends up being the opposite. The German commander is a brilliant commander. His name's Kesselring, Kesselring, and Kesselring has been giving us trouble all the way through, really Sicily and so on. And now Kesselring here establishes something just north of Salerno called the Gustav line, because it was the Gustav line. And the biggest problem in Anzio, and I told you about when we get to it, are the hills. It's very rugged. Some of the best lines by the soldiers who went through this, the American soldiers have a really good humorous view of this. Is one guy said there's only two directions I know about in Italy. One's up and one's down. They're going up these mountains, these rigorous mountains. And what you have to remember is war material, war supplies. And one of the great things is modern technology, the aircraft carrier and all these other things. It's the donkeys. You really need these donkeys. And so it's how do you get through these mountain passes and these very difficult things. Plus, think about it. As they're moving up and down these mountains, I mean, the soldiers have been given these cigarettes. They get sent these Lucky Strikes. They're carrying them around, and they're smoking all the time. They all smoke. This is the big smoking generation. When you look at you watch movies in the 1940s, everybody smokes, but in the soldier they smoke. And the tobacco companies, if you go back to the home front, has tremendous power in this, and they're just sending these cigarettes. So here's these guys smoking all these cigarettes up and down this hilly country. And our real enemy then is what? The Germans, maybe not, maybe emphysema, you know, and so this is really what's going on for us in these rocky, rugged hills. And that's the Germans' position of this. They bury themselves up in these rocky ridges. They have the high ground, very defensible position, and the Americans always have more. This is one of the we have more divisions than they do in most cases, and so because of this, they're in this very defensible position. And it gets to this place called Monte Cassino, another sea. Monte Cassino. It's not a casino like a slot machine, but it's goes back to the days with, and I'm blanking. I don't know why I'm blanking on this. With monasteries, my gosh, Gallagher, monasteries, Monte Cassino, monasteries, and so they're holed up using this as a base of operations. The Americans are conflicted about what to do. Now they're down below and they're trying to work up and dislodge the Germans, and this becomes horrific for them. They're pinned down, they're in trouble. And one of the great guys with him is a man, you can look him up, Ernie Pyle, Ernie, Ernie, and Pyle, Pyle. He's a news correspondent, Pulitzer Prize winner, and he's reporting about this. And there's a really good movie, if you ever get a chance to see it, called The Story of G.I. Joe. Burgess Meredith is Ernie Pyle, and I would recommend it. It's excellent. And so the whole concept here is the Americans are trying to decide what to do with this. Well, Do you bomb it? Well, you can't bomb it. This is a religious site. It's protected historically, and I always thought Monte Cassino had withstood all these invasions, the Arabs, and all these other tribes that have come in and tried to take it. Here it is in World War II being used by the Germans as a defensible location. So then the decision is to kind of envelop Cassino, this location. So the Americans are going to have a landing to the north. And this is at a place called Anzio. That poem I told you about, the crosses that grow in Anzio. And so you kind of get a foreshadowing on what this is going to be like. And so the Americans begin this heavy beach presence. And this is where if you do your reading, you'll find out about the 82nd Airborne. This is the use of the airborne, the integration of it. And this is kind of when you really look at it, it seems kind of familiar. It's kind of the same idea whenever you look at D-Day in a way of how the procedure was going to go. And at Anzio, it's to the north of the Gustav line. And this is the man who's given the position to hold this is American general named John Lucas. And Lucas is not very happy with this. Neither is Marshall. George Marshall would talk about it because they're tired of Churchill doing this. And if you know your World War I history, and we haven't got to it yet in my world history class, so is the Battle of Gallipoli, that was a horror show for the Brits that Winston Churchill orchestrated as the Lord Admiralty there in England. And so what happens is this is a reminiscent in kind of Lucas's mind. Good history here, and he's just upset. He doesn't want to do it, and he voices it. He's very vocal about this, but nonetheless, it goes off. And so the idea of landing Anzio, and I drew a little map in my own little crude handwriting, and I apologize. And what you have to think is Anzio's at the top, Salerno's at the bottom. This is Operation Shingle over an avalanche, and this is Operation Shingle, Operation Avalanche. And so the landing at Anzio took place. And the landing isn't really anything to write home about, to be fun about. There is this massive, powerful counterattack, and the Americans are just really ruggedly moving through and wading through it, the horrors of war. And finally, this envelopment works out, and finally, Kesselring is removed. They retreat, and this is always one of the great controversies in this part of history: is should Clark have gone after Kesselring and closed in on him and ended it like this? Instead, he decides the real prize is the road to Rome. And he decides to go to Rome. And when he does this, Kesselring slips to the north, and then he establishes another line further north. Very far north is the Gothic line. That's what the Gothic line refers to. Yet another rugged Rocky Mountain area up there in the scenic area of northern Italy. And this is really not the right thing. Then Clark should have probably taken him out, but instead allows him to slip. And anyway, what this leads back to is now the Americans out of this are ready for that cross-channel invasion. They're going to start diverting things. Italy is now going to be used for these bases of operation for bombing offensive, but Kesselring and his guys up there in the Gothic line are going to hold up to just about the last week of the war. But now you can use these in Milan, these regions in northern parts of Italy. You can start using these as bomber offensives, and the Americans have already started with the Brits, the combined bomber offensive. I don't have time to I don't want to drag this out too much. And I guess one thing to think about in the closing of this is, as these guys went overseas and they attempted to win victory over a terrible enemy, it's the same thing we kind of are today. The idea that we're isolating ourselves, the idea that we're separating ourselves. Well, these guys were separate from their families for quite a while, and the letters are awesome to read. What these young men and women wrote back, because nurses are there too. And speaking of nurses, this was vital. The hospital units that were absolutely essential, because medical technology is very important when you study World War II. This is why, even though you have massive casualties, the Americans are going to have 188,000. I didn't say there were 188,000 casualties in this campaign, in the Italian campaign, and the cost and the sacrifice. So as we go through what we're enduring today, we're enduring something similar to the generation of World War II, and something certainly they didn't think they'd be involved. A lot of people are questioning and asking, what in the world are we doing over here? And it uproots your life, and this is that citizen soldier, that commitment. And so when I read the news about, it's our right to party, and I remember the Beastie Boys, you have to think of something else than that. You have to endure in the sense that there is something more important here, and we owe it. We owe it to the future generations unborn. We owe it to the current generation, and we certainly owe it to the elderly. And so I guess that's my sermon for that part. But think about this: World War II. And the idea of the Italian campaign, I am going to split it now from the Pacific campaign. Next time we will look at not D-Day. Hold on, we're getting there. We're going to flip out to the Pacific and look at Macon and Tarawa, where my dad fought and my uncles were involved in World War II. My dad suffered tremendously on Tarawa, a horrific 72-hour engagement with the Japanese. And I'll get to that next. But thank you very much. Hope you're safe. Sanitize. Stay isolated. This is the new world for now, but it is never over. Always stay on the front line. Always think of defense, and always think of things are going to get better if I do my part. Okay, thank you. Miss you guys. I'll see you. Bye.